Good evening. My name is Ashlyn Luisi, and today I will be arguing why states should surrender their sovereignty and comply with humanitarian international law. Let's begin by defining the concept of state sovereignty in itself. State sovereignty in international law is the principle that each state has a supreme authority within its territory, free from external interference. Via sovereignty, states are granted the right to govern themselves, create their own laws, and manage their internal affairs. This includes political, economic, and social systems. Arguably, sovereignty is the cornerstone of the international system. However, this principle is far from absolute, given that states must adhere to international law and treaties or voluntarily limit their sovereignty. While state sovereignty remains a cornerstone of international relations, surrendering aspects of it to uphold humanitarian international law is necessary. It is necessary to prevent atrocities, ensure accountability, and strengthen global stability. International humanitarian law is a set of rules that seek to limit the effects of armed conflict. It was established to protect the people who are not participating or no longer participating in hostilities. International humanitarian law is designed to limit the means and methods of warfare and requires the rapid, unimpeded passage of humanitarian aid. The Geneva Conventions are amongst the most widely ratified international conventions, which form the core foundations of international humanitarian law. The Geneva Conventions define the basic rights of civilians, prisoners of war, and military personnel, as well as establish protections for the wounded and the sick. The International Criminal Court, otherwise referred to as the ICC, is an international system that upholds international humanitarian law. As to why state sovereignty should be surrendered in respect to international humanitarian law, there are several arguments to be made here. States are expected to uphold moral and ethical imperatives. In order to uphold said imperatives, it is essential that human rights transcend borders. Sovereignty should not outweigh human rights, let alone be used to justify genocide, ethnic cleansing, or torture, all of which are crimes under the international humanitarian law doctrine as well as ICC statutes. This brings me to the responsibility to protect or R2P doctrine, which was established by the United Nations in 2005. R2P is a global political norm aimed at preventing four mass atrocity crimes: genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. The R2P is made up of three pillars. Pillar 1 establishes state responsibility. Pillar 2 requires international assistance. And Pillar 3 states that if a state fails to protect its population, the international community will take action using peaceful means or military intervention when authorized by the UN Security Council. Referencing R2P, it is clearly defined that the international community has a moral and legal responsibility to intervene if the state fails to protect its people. There are already additional legal and institutional foundations that outline the integrity that states and international organizations agree to uphold. I would like to bring attention to the UN Charter Article 1. Article 1 clearly outlines four purposes of the United Nations, to which all other articles are centered around. The key goals of the UN are also listed in this article, which include solving economic, social, cultural, and humanitarian issues, all whilst promoting universal respect for human rights. Furthermore, the ICC has become more widely respected by the international community in recent years as a result of its continuous prosecution of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The states increasingly turning to and abiding by the ICC rulings is a direct demonstration of states voluntarily limiting sovereignty for justice. Some may argue that the international law lacks enforcement. However, enforcement has already shown a rapid improvement, especially in recent years. For example, through ICC cases, sanctions, and global pressure, the enforcement of international law is becoming more and more reliable, demonstrating the accountability mechanisms are finally catching up to modern global challenges. This is the growth of power that is seen in circumstances such as Russia's war crimes being investigated, despite Russia being one of the major world powers. Other proposed concerns would include humanitarian intervention being abused, which is directly prevented by transparent legal frameworks. The framework includes UN approval and ICC jurisdiction, which reduces misuse of humanitarian law and increases accountability of international law. The compliance of states surrendering sovereignty to comply with international humanitarian law comes with several practical benefits. Compliance with humanitarian law reduces cycles of displacement and terrorism, promoting global stability and peace. There's also a further incentive of credibility and soft power that states earn through their compliance with international humanitarian law. States that comply gain legitimacy and moral authority, which overflows into other global affairs. There's also an added benefit of collective security for those who cooperate under international law. This strengthens multilateral organizations such as the UN, ICC, ICJ, and regional courts. The benefits are clear. I would also, however, like to highlight the consequences of not surrendering sovereignty for compliance to international humanitarian law. The genocide in Rwanda is one of the clearest examples of the deadly consequences of prioritizing state sovereignty over humanitarian action. As nearly 800,000 people were slaughtered in just 100 days, the international community hesitated to intervene, citing respect for Rwanda's sovereignty. The UN mission already on the ground was denied reinforcements, and major powers refused to label the violence as genocide because doing so would have legally required action. The strict adherence to sovereignty allowed mass murder to continue virtually unchecked. Rwanda demonstrates that when sovereignty becomes an obstacle to protecting human life, the result is catastrophic. It shows that the international community must be willing to override sovereignty when a state fails to protect its own population. In conclusion, the principle of state sovereignty cannot outweigh the fundamental rights and safety of human beings. When sovereignty is treated as an absolute, it too often becomes a shield for injustice, allowing governments to commit or ignore atrocities without consequence. Humanitarian international law offers a framework that promotes accountability, protects vulnerable populations, and prevents the kind of tragedies the world has witnessed in places such as Rwanda. By surrendering a degree of sovereignty, states demonstrate a commitment to shared moral standards. Ultimately, true legitimacy comes not from guarding power behind borders, but from upholding humanity. Compliance with humanitarian international law is not only a legal obligation, but it is a moral imperative.